Wow, I'm really good with uploading videos. So recently I made a short documentary on the early Korean rock scene of the 1960s. That video was a true passion project of mine and was the result of years of digging into Korean rock history all by myself. This got me thinking, as back during the early days of my research, I had a lot of unanswered questions. As time went on and I talked to more people who were way more knowledgeable on the topic, a lot of these questions were answered. However, there are still quite a few unanswered questions that remain. I use the word question way too much. Quite a few of these problems may have really obvious answers, but I kept them in the list just to entertain the idea. Without further ado, here are 5 mysteries surrounding early Korean rock history. What was the first Keyboy's album? For a long time, people believed that the first Korean rock album was made by the Ad4, released in December of 1964. However, when the Keyboys' first album was found, it was clear that this was actually the first Korean rock album. Released 5 months prior to the Ad4's album, this record featured the band singing and covering many rock and pop songs of the time. Also, please do watch the mini documentary I made as I go more in depth there. However, what caught my eye was a little conversation that was glossed over in the book Korean Pop Archaeology 1960. In this book, the drummer of the Keyboys, Yoon Gi, was interviewed about his time in the group. When the interviewer asked about the Keyboys' first album and whether or not this was their first or if they had featured as a backing band on a different album, Yoon Gi states that he recalls a different album being their first. A record called The Old Ship Departs, recorded in the Oasis record studio. The thing is, an album with that title already exists. It was a split album between the singer Johnny Lee and the Keyboys, and it is theorized to be their second album. Then, the interviewer asks about that supposed second Keyboys album, to which Yoon states, "Isn't this album edited? I recall there being a separate Johnny Lee and Keyboys albums, because the Keyboys were very popular at the time." So now we have their first album, which is supposedly their second, and their second album, which the drummer states is edited and is implied that it is their first record. Another discrepancy is about the record labels. Yoon states that the first album was recorded in the Oasis record studio, implying that it was also released by Oasis Records. But in truth, the Old Ship Departs album was released by Shinsegae Records, the same label as their first album. The band didn't actually release any records under Oasis until 1966, 2 years later. So what could be happening here? Well, first, all this took place 40 years before the interview, and sometimes the memory can cheat. And second, the Old Ship Departs is actually also on their first album. Back in those days, if there was a song the band liked or was a hit, it would be re-recorded for a future album, and that's what happened here. In fact, the Keyboys have put that song on their album no fewer than 4 times. Of course, nothing is confirmed, and there are people on either side discussing which album came first, but with no concrete proof, everything is hearsay. Missing recordings of early Korean bands. One thing I mentioned in my documentary was the fact that Korean rock started in American army bases. However, something I failed to mention was how little footage we have of 60s Korean bands. In fact, there is little to none. This is understandable as the cameras were big, bulky, and were hard to handle by the everyday person. However, a lot of these bands did appear on television. Sure, a lot of the shows from this time were wiped to save on tape, and this goes for a lot of Western countries as well, but is it believable that there is nothing, literally nothing from this time regarding these bands? Maybe they're in the depths of an old television station's archives, just waiting to be discovered. Moreover, why are there no audio recordings of any 60s Korean rock bands performing live? These bands performed to a crowd of American soldiers, and surely at least one of them had a reel-to-reel tape recorder. In fact, we know American soldiers had reel-to-reel tape recorders because Shin Jung-hyun's first album was actually recorded with a borrowed reel-to-reel recorder from an American soldier. Again, maybe these recordings are in an old American attic where they're gathering dust, waiting to be discovered. General dating of album releases. In the Western music scene, most popular and well-regarded albums have a set-in-stone release date. The only real album without a confirmed release date that I can think of off the top of my head is Bob Dylan's 1966 album, Blonde on Blonde, and even that has some kind of official release date, regardless of how inaccurate they may be. However, if you've researched foreign albums, not just Korean music, you'll know how much of a pain it is to put some of these releases on a timeline. Thankfully, during the late 1960s and early 1970s, some record labels started putting the manufacturing dates on the label, making things easier for historians and researchers. although these are just manufacture dates and it is unknown if they were released on the same day or a while later. The main problem lies with the records of the early to mid 1960s. The problem is so bad that sometimes people aren't even sure what year a certain album was released. Take this instrumental album by the Ad4 as an example. For the longest time, I thought this was the first pressing, released in 1965, and this one was the second pressing, released in 1966, thanks to Discogs. However, now there's discourse on whether or not that's true. Now, people are saying that this release was actually the first pressing, and this one the second. This makes you wonder how an error of this magnitude could happen in the first place. Another example is the dating of 60s Keyboy's albums. Now, we know the first album was made in 1964, that's for sure. However, there are conflicting opinions on when their second album was released. Places like ManiaDB claim that it was released in 1964, meaning the band must have recorded 6 tracks in under 6 months, which sounds a bit dodgy to me, whilst the more credible sources claim that it was released in 1966, which sounds plausible at first if you disregard the fact that they must have taken the whole of 1965 off recording-wise. But then you remember their third and fourth albums were all released in 1966, which isn't impossible, but they must have had some serious work schedule to make that work. What happened to the members of the Ad4? The Ad4 were the reason I got into Korean music, so I always had a certain fondness towards their music despite their shortcomings. Being hailed today as the first Korean rock band to release a full 14-track album consisting of only originals in 1964, even the Beatles couldn't do that at the time. They were nothing to scoff at. However, after their first album flopped in sales, it seems that Shin Jin-hyun, the lead guitarist, songwriter, and the leader of the group, seemed to lose confidence in his own songwriting skills. Their next album would be a rock and roll covers album backing a jazz singer, Kim Young-guk. After that, they would release an album of surf rock covers of Korean oldies before breaking up. Now, after the Ad4, Shin Jin-hyun became very famous writing songs for other artists, and everyone knows his side of the story. However, this always overshadowed the careers of the other members, which I found frustrating as there was so little information on where the other members ended up. First, we have the lead singer and rhythm guitarist of the group, Seo Jung-gil. After the Ad4 broke up, he pursued a solo career, occasionally appearing on omnibus releases, never really making a full album. There is this album that has him on the front cover. It's not a full album of Seo Jung-gil, although it does have the most tracks out of all the releases he's been a part of. Also, I would love to tell you what this album is like, but there are literally 2 photos of this album online, let alone a rip of the audio, and believe me, I looked everywhere online and offline for this album. I can't find it. Unfortunately, Seo Jung-gil would unexpectedly pass away in 1974 when a nightclub went up in flames. It is said that at first he made it out safely, then after he noticed all his guitars were still in the building, he went back in, never to come out again. On the booklet for the Ad4's box set, it is said that Seo Jung-gil led a popular solo career that was cut short, and although there is little evidence of said career, I still like researching about it. There's even less info on the bassist Han Young-hyun. At first, he joined Shin on his new band Blues Tet on acoustic guitar during this weird point in Shin's career after the Ad4 when he still wasn't famous but was still putting out records, and then Han sort of disappears from history, with Choi Gi-sung, a Korean music historian, mentioning that he passed away due to tuberculosis. On a lighter note, the drummer Kwon Sung-gun moved to Canada. It seems like he had a musical career there, and I think he even wrote a song or two. But suddenly in the 2000s, he became internet famous after a video of him drumming to My Way went viral on YouTube. This led to a bunch of YouTube videos starring Kwon, and even a documentary about him, although I couldn't find the full thing, just the trailer. More recently, he has appeared on Canada's Got Talent at the ripe old age of 82, and it seems like he actually passed, although I don't really know how these talent shows work. As you can see, there are still a lot of gaps in the history, and with everyone so focused on Shin's career, I kinda take it as my duty to research the careers of the other members. How many undiscovered albums and bands are out there? During the early to mid 1960s, when various Beatle-like bands exploded onto the Korean music scenes, do you know how many bands there were that released an album all by themselves? 4! Yeah, no, there were only 4 bands that managed to pull this off. The Ad4, the Keyboys, the Actions, and the Five Fingers. The rest of them released albums by backing other singers, or they just never put out anything. This was because album making was seen as something only singers do, and the band's purpose was to perform live and back the singers on records. This notion stopped in the late 1960s when more and more bands released albums of their own during the boom of psychedelic group sound bands. But there really isn't much in the first half of the 60s. There's evidence of other bands being out there like the Kimchis, the Babos, the Dark Eyes, the Ends, Fabulous 7, Elephant Brothers, and probably a lot more, but there isn't much documentation on these bands. So what's to say that there aren't more Korean bands that we have yet to discover? Many of the people involved with these bands are at that age where if we don't do anything to preserve their stories, they may be lost forever. People like Chae Gi-sung have been going around the country to preserve these lost tales, and maybe with their help, more of Korea's music history can be remembered for years to come. Hey, what's up? Happy New Year, or whenever I finish this video. Thank you so much for the support on the previous video. I really appreciate it. And I also noticed YouTuber by the name of Shoes in the Dryer, weird name, they also shouted my blog out and my other channel out where I upload Korean album rips in their video called Getting Into Korean Music Besides K-Pop. I loved that video. That was the sort of videos I wanted to make with this channel, and I just love seeing someone outside of the Korean community trying to get into Korean music because it's a wonderful whole new world. And I really hope you enjoyed this video. Sorry it took so long. It's just my work ethic and just I have too much on my plate. I start projects and then I never finish them. I wrote a Shinjingan book, and then I started writing another Shinjingan related book, and then I never finished that because I scrapped it to make this video, and then I stopped making this script for this video to write another book called like 60 Korean rock albums from 1964 to 1980, and then I stopped making that because I got burnt out, and then I started scripting out a website, like it's HTML site documenting all the Korean records I own and if I've like ripped them or not, and then I stopped doing that just to go back onto the script because I've watched too many video essays. Now I'm back in the spirit, but yeah, I don't know how long it'll take until the next video, and I don't know how long it'll take until the next Korean related video, but I hope it's soon. I want to talk about so many other things. I want to talk about like Jejun, Sex Pistols, more of the Sex Pistols, and there's still a lot of Korean rock history that I need to teach the world. So I'll let you know whenever I make that website. I'll let you know if I ever finish that book. I also wanted to create I know I have too many channels, but I wanted to create a second channel for this channel where I just post stuff like all the I show off all the Korean records I own, and that could be sort of the appendix to all the videos I upload. So maybe that could be exciting. I could show you all the records I own and sort of tell you a story of their discography, and you can watch that as a companion piece to a video essay I make about the band. So maybe that could be a little exciting side thing I could do, just a quick like video upload, because those videos don't take much effort to make or edit. But yeah, that's about it. I hope you had a great year, or hope this is a good year. I don't know when you're going to be watching this. Goodbye.